Welcome to World Have Your Say at the end of a week when Barack Obama won a second term. Now, it was said that nothing could match the significance of 4 years ago when he became the first black US president, and really few argued with that idea. But then the results started coming through, and it became clear that the Latinos, African Americans, women and the under-30s had played a huge part in keeping the president in office. And this, some of you believe, is a fundamental shift in power away from the white men who have dominated US politics for centuries. Do you believe that? Perhaps you think it's a liberal exaggeration. Maybe you're inspired by the idea. Whatever your views, you're very welcome. We're going to start in America, and in the next hour, we will go around the world. Well, let's meet our first guests, and we're going to let them introduce themselves. We're going to begin in Washington, D.C.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alyssa Giordano. I'm a student and Republican activist coming to you from Washington, D.C.
Good to have you on World Have Your Say. From D.C. to Denver.
Good morning. This is Debbie Brown. I am the director of Colorado Women's Alliance, and from Denver, Colorado this morning.
Great to have you on the program too, Debbie. Let's go from Denver even further west to Los Angeles.
Hi, this is Megan Ortiz, publisher of VivirLatino.com and a freelance writer writing about Latino issues.
Well, all three of you, as I was saying on Twitter about half an hour ago, I was looking at all of the guests we've got coming on to today's program, and I couldn't wait to hear this discussion. So let me be quiet and let's all listen to you. Perhaps, Megan, we could start with you. Do you think that there has been a fundamental shift in US politics this week?
I think the shift that we have seen is basically a shift that's reflective of a shift in demographics in the United States. We saw Obama winning again, and the women across age groups, people of color across age groups, also voting for Obama. So I think what we see is just a reflection of what's happening nationally. In terms of policies, I think we still have a long way to go. I think there's a lot more nuance in terms of where we are and if we've actually shifted in terms of policy and how we talk about issues.
Debbie.
Sure. I'd just throw out, there's still a lot of data to come, but the preliminary exit poll data does show that there was a demographic divide in this election cycle. One of the things I find most interesting is the exit question wasn't necessarily how people felt about the economy. It was they chose President Obama because he most understands people like them and their problems. It was an empathy vote, an emotional vote to some degree, rather than an economic vote.
Alyssa, do you think that's true?
I think that the exit polling was a little off also. I would have to say that I think that the most important issue that a lot of young people are seeing in this election was the economy, and I don't think that the exit polling question was fair. And it was, I know in Pennsylvania specifically, they're asking a lot of questions about how do you feel about abortion, and I just don't think that that is the number one issue right now. The number one issue is the economy and the $16 trillion debt and the financial cliff we're about to fall off of.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. We do research with Colorado Women's Alliance that showed that the economy was the number one issue for women and outranked issues like reproductive health and reproductive rights 2-to-1. What probably happened too was some of the distraction with the news showing a little bit of a change in the job growth in America and might have changed the economy from being the number one issue on Election Day.
But I like to say that I think that I think we like to segment issues and like to compartmentalize issues when really it doesn't really work that way in the real world. And I think we need to look at not whether the economy polled better or reproductive justice polled better, but rather look at the intersection of these issues. And that's what I meant when I said we have to also talk differently about policy. And I don't know if that shift is actually happening because I still hear this compartmentalizing of issues as if the economy doesn't impact women's access to health care and vice versa.
Well, and I would say some of the work we've done again on the economic issues with women is finding out how they receive an economic message. Women listen to it a little bit differently according to what we've found. They see it in personal terms. The college kid who moved back home with their family, their husband out of work, less opportunities for them personally, economically. And so the economic message, we see it differently, I think, with different demographic groups, but that's what really hits hardest for women.
Right, and I'd be interested in hearing actually the difference among demographic groups, especially obviously across racial lines, ethnic lines, and across economic lines, because I think what we didn't see happening during this election cycle, and we're still not hearing about in sort of the post-roundup, is, poor people, for example, poor people of color. Those have been basically made completely invisible during the election cycle, and I haven't seen any change of that post-election analysis.
I'm very interested that you mentioned that because World Have You Say spent 3 weeks in America, and time again, we reflected on the fact that both candidates continually spoke to the middle classes. Very few talked about people at the poorer end of America's society. I wonder if I could ask all three of you, though, what you think about the fact that so much of the media and politicians talk about winning women's votes. They treat women as one voter block, which to some people might seem a little bit odd. Alyssa, do you take offence when people talk in that way?
I think I do, because I don't want to be discredited for my vote. I think that, the women that came out to the polls this time definitely proved that we are to be taken seriously, and just as seriously as any man or minority that's voting. We have 20 women now in Congress, and that's the highest number that it's ever been. I think that it definitely goes to show that, we are to not be taken lightly anymore.
Yeah, I'll just add in, I think especially the war on women this election cycle was fascinating, because to create a new government program, mandated government-funded birth control for women, and then all of a sudden call it a war on women, and we don't have access to birth control. Many of the women in America should be offended. We think about things like foreign policy. We think about things like quality higher education for our children. Birth control is a single issue, and women are much more broad than that.
Absolutely, and I would have to say that there is no war on women. This was literally just a platform that the liberals took advantage of. They spewed it out of control, and they ran with it. There's no war on women. Do I feel personally attacked every day? No, I don't. It's ridiculous. It's, like I said, a platform that they tried to create and ran with it.
Well, and I feel attacked as a business owner, not because I'm a woman in America right now.
Exactly. I come from a family where we own a small business, and my mom is now having to deal with the repercussions of Obamacare. Is she going to have to lay off her employees? Is it going to affect her being able to pay for things for my family? That's a bigger issue in America right now, not the war on women.
Well, I think I actually would like to challenge both of you, because I think women, as you two have just discussed, women are business owners. Women are more than just obviously their reproductive organs. But again, you're not talking about the reality of a vast majority of women in the United States who don't have access to health insurance at all. I'm a mother. I care about education. As a Latin American woman, I care about foreign policy. But all of these things intersect, and I think we can't deny that for many people, it's a struggle to get food on the table. It's a struggle, and especially women and women of color, whose income disparity far outweighs white women. So I think when we want to talk about a war on women, we need to contextualize it a little bit. And if you're one of the many or few who feel like you're not attacked every day by policy and by micro-racism, then good, and congratulations. But for many, the policy and practices of the United States and how that impacts globally, that's really not the case.
Well, all three of you, as you're talking, we're getting a huge reaction. Just before you jump in, I just want to let you know how many people are responding to the conversation you're having. We've got contributions coming in from the Netherlands, Ghana, the UK, the US, Spain, Cameroon, Norway, Nigeria, and Senegal. Zach is watching in Minneapolis. He says more class warfare, more international policing, more debt, more inflation, higher unemployment. I can't wait. I think it's fair to say he didn't vote for President Obama. And Patrick in Zambia says Obama and the Republicans both got a resounding message at the polls this week. They both will have to move to the center ground and find compromise or risk not winning again. Do you think, all three of you, that's a conclusion we should draw? Alyssa, that whether it's a Democrat or Republican, if you don't go to the center ground, if you don't talk directly to women or Latinos or African Americans, you simply aren't going to win.
I would agree. I think that in 2004, when Bush lost his election, he kind of went a little bit more towards the moderate because he knew he wasn't going to keep far liberals and far conservatives. And that is what Obama should do. Obama should move to the center and unite the country. It's not a war on women. It's a war on American families. It's a war on everyone. You know, regardless of what you think about far left or far right, we need to unite. We need to become, you know, the United States of America.
So you're saying Barack Obama should head to the center, but I'm also thinking about the Republicans because, Debbie, there's been criticism of Mitt Romney since he lost that he just didn't give these key sets of voters enough attention.
Well, I think what you have to look at besides the demographic shift is the Republican Party, especially the conservative branch. Look, they believe in limited government, personal responsibility, capitalism, and free markets. Those are tougher things to sell sometimes than starting new government programs when you're trying to limit government because it ultimately brings more freedom for people. I think it's a tougher sell than what the Democrat Party offers, which is more goodies sometimes for special groups and more entitlement programs and more dependency.
And Megan, what about you? There's been an awful lot of talk about the Republican Party seeking out a Latino candidate in 4 years' time. Would you think that would attract lots of Latino voters?
I mean, I don't think necessarily having a Latino candidate is going to attract, Latino voters. I think that sort of discredits the Latino voter and assumes that we vote basically just based on ethnicity or race. I think what has been interesting is looking at this post-election cycle, we've already seen many Republicans moving away from their very anti-immigrant rhetoric. We've already seen lots of pundits and politicians say, maybe we actually do need to talk about immigration reform in a way that doesn't demonize all Latino people and all immigrants. So I think what we already are seeing is a sort of shift in the way we're starting to talk about things, which is really important.
All three of you, thank you very much indeed. More and more contributions are coming in for you. Latest ones coming from Liberia, Tanzania, Zambia, and another couple here, Gambia, Kenya and Pakistan. All of you watching BBC World News Live, keep them coming. I'll work in as many of your contributions as I possibly can. Alyssa, Megan and Debbie, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a pause for a moment or two and then we'll carry on our conversation. Right, let's switch to a man with his hands full. Ben James is in the World Have Your Say newsroom. Ben, what have you got for us?
Well, so many of you have been calling in to talk about this subject. Country code 4420 31 62 4242 is the number to call. It'll be on your screen throughout the programme. Michael's given us a ring from Norway. He says, victory for Obama shows the issue of the American founding principle. Everyone's free to pursue their own goals. Showed Romney that it's not just a country for white people. So that's Michael's take on it. Adedayo's called from the United States, from Pennsylvania, says he was a Republican voter at this election. He won, Obama that is, because the Republican Party, my party, scared a lot of people. Obama appealed to more groups of people. Republicans must learn to this. And I'm sure we'll get into this in the rest of the programme, Ros, with your guests, exactly what the Republicans might do after this Obama victory to change their focus, perhaps, as some are saying they should. Get in touch with us through the programme, on the phone, of course, on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. Hi there, I'm Ros Atkins. We're here live on World Have Your Say, discussing the impact of the US election on American politics and the power within American politics and how it's distributed. Some people are saying this was the week when white men who have dominated American politics as long as anyone can remember had to accept there were other people to consider. Latinos, African Americans, any number of different minorities became hugely significant in the way the Electoral College panned out. Others, though, are saying this is just a liberal fantasy. They're overemphasizing the gap between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Either way, you're welcome to get in touch. We're on hashtag WHYS, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Before I introduce you to a couple more guests, let's pull up a little bit of what The Economist magazine's leader had to say. What strikes one most strongly looking back at America from across an ocean, and they are in London, The Economist, the country seems repeatedly embroiled in savage 51-49 electoral campaigns, and it seems to be increasingly paralysed by irresolvable rancour between right and left. Well, we can talk about that with Alyssa, who's still with us from Virginia. Well, she's in Washington, D.C., but she lives in Virginia. We also have Cynthia Yorkey live with us from Maryland, who writes a conservative lesbian blog. That's its title, not my description. And we've also got Kelly Goff, a political correspondent for TheRoot.com in New York. Kelly, let me start with you and your response to that analysis from The Economist that actually America is ever more divided.
Well, that's what all of the polls and some of the analysis before the election showed, that this was going to be one of the most racially divided elections in recent memory. And yet, just to be clear, President Obama won with about 40% of the white vote. It's not as big of a number as some other candidates have had, but just to be clear, he would not have been reelected president without some support from white voters. But what I think is interesting is, for all of the talk about how divided our country is and how we are, split right down the middle, the reality is that is changing. By 2025, Latinos are going to be largely the majority in this country, and that means that states like Texas, which is where I grew up and where I'm from, which has been overwhelmingly Republican for many years, with some rare exceptions like the very famous governor, late great governor Ann Richards, who was very known for her one-liners and her quips. And she became sort of a legendary figure, but for the most part, it's been a Republican state, the Bushes, et cetera.
But Kelly,
and that state is going to change because of the Latino vote. They are predicting, even Jeb Bush is saying that that's going to become a Democratic state much sooner
Kelly,
than
let
we
me jump in here,
anticipate.
though, because you're talking about the demographics, and what you're analysing is incredibly important. But I think what The Economist is getting at is that there's a more fundamental divide here. Barack Obama, in his acceptance speech, said that our politics make society look more divided than it actually is. The Economist is putting a different opinion.
Well, and and let me say again that why I think that for now that might be the case, but that's changing, is because all of the demographic data, and I'm not talking about race specific, I'm talking about age specific. I'm considered an older version of Generation Y. I'm on the older version of that generation. And so anyone in my generation and younger, all of the studies are showing, every piece of research shows that they are overwhelmingly supporters of things like gay rights. They support things like interracial relationships. They're more open-minded on the environment. Even when you look at the polling data from places like Pew Research Center, and you look at practicing, first of all, they're less religious, but even those who identify themselves as Christians are more open-minded on a number of these so-called liberal issues. So what point am I trying to make with that? I'm saying that as this generation continues to grow up, we are going to become a country that is less divided on a lot of these issues.
Well, let's get you talking. Let me jump in here and let me get you talking with Cynthia, who I'm sure is listening keenly, as is Megan as well, and Alyssa as well in Washington, D.C. Cynthia, your view, is American society as divided as ever, perhaps more so than ever?
I think that what we have now is...
Oh, that line's not great, Cynthia. We'll clear that up. In the meantime, Alyssa, I'll ask you the same question.
I think that America is divided, but I do agree with the woman who just spoke before me that as we do continue to grow, we will agree on issues such as gay rights and other similar issues. I have a ton of gay friends. I'm totally in support of civil unions. I think that that is a part of my party that we might have to look at and reconsider in the future, our platform on it, because it's not going away. And I think that's very evident with how the states have been voting on it. But I do think that it is a state issue, and I do not think that that's a federal issue, the same way that marriage is a state issue. But back to the divide, I think that it is divided. I mean, when Drudge puts up on the top of their headline, the divided states of America, it's not just for fun, it's true. I mean, Obama has divided the country. When you can't pass a budget, but you tell American families that they have to, it's not fair, and people are angry.
And I think...
Can I jump in here, though? Oh, sorry.
No, of course you can. I was just going to mention that World Have Your Say has been taking calls for the past few days on BBC World Service Radio, and it's not scientific, but in my experience, Democrats weren't just delighted that President Obama had won. They were absolutely delighted that the Republicans are now beginning to argue over where it all went wrong. And the Republicans I spoke to, the vast majority, were fuming that this had come to pass. And it did appear, judging on the American listeners World Have Your Say has, that America is incredibly divided. James is is in Fort Myers. He listens to us on WGCU. He says on Facebook, I think the lesson, and you can see that there, I think the lesson that he has made, let me pull up the text here so I can read that to you. I think the lesson of this election is if you want people to hear your overall message, you have to show you have a basic level of understanding and respect for them. Women, Hispanics, gays and lesbians, all are being disrespected and misunderstood by the Republican Party. Debbie, is that putting it too strongly?
I think there are some hard lessons we've got to figure out in the next couple months, in the Republican Party especially. I will say our effort in Colorado, which is a very pivotal swing state, we actually show no gender gap among women in Colorado based on early exit polling. And I think it's some of the work that groups like mine have done and other groups in Colorado to take economic messages and a broader message to women. So I think principles of limited government and conservatism actually are great principles. We've just got to figure out how to communicate them to a broader group. So I completely agree it's divisive right now. To some degree, that's how our country was set up with divided government. And these conversations are healthy to figure out what path we want for America.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Contributions coming in from Trinidad and Tobago, Spain, India, Somalia, South Africa and Jamaica. We're live here on BBC World News, and this is World Have Your Say, certainly living up to its name today. ML Toure has just called up to say here in Gambia there's a public holiday to celebrate Obama's victory. Aslan is tweeting us, the election showed us that America is divided. For every person that's celebrating Obama's victory, there seems to be one who certainly isn't. And Ali in Jos in Nigeria making a point that so many African viewers and listeners to World Have Your Say have made. He says Nigerian politicians should emulate Mitt Romney for conceding defeat and not challenging the results in court. Well, that's an interesting point. Kelly, do you think that Mitt Romney does deserve some credit for the way that he lost?
Absolutely. I think he showed tremendous grace. I mean, I really do. And I actually I have to tell you, I wrote a column for The Root where I did a list of questions we all wanted to hear in a debate that we never would hear. And one of the questions I had when I wrote this column a couple months ago was the question of, would you be willing to sit down with your opponent if you lose and agree to help him move this country forward? That was one of the questions I had listed. So when I heard President Obama say that in his speech, and then I read later on that they said that Governor Romney is open to sitting down with the president if it's a genuine, offer and invitation to talk about what they can agree on to help move our country forward. And I just want to say to the issue of divisiveness, I think that this is a really powerful point, is that even though we see nothing but fighting on television, even though that's what gets the most news coverage, even though that's what, people sometimes like to watch, that doesn't represent the majority of our country. Independents are among the fastest growing in the electorate, particularly in states like California. Independents are soon going to surpass Republicans and Democrats. And that means that the majority of Americans actually want to see our country working together, not shouting at each other.
I can promise there's not going to be any shouting matches here on the BBC, Kelly. I wonder quickly if Cynthia is there. Can you hear us now okay, Cynthia?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. That's fantastic news. We're right at the end of this half hour of World Have Your Say, but I promise you'll be the first guest that we speak to when we come back here on the BBC. We've just had a call in from Sri Lanka, also emails in from Mauritania and Sudan. We're talking about the US elections, gathering your general reaction to it. Also, a lot of Democrats are saying this election is as inspirational as the one 4 years ago. Then you had America's first black president. This time you've seen under 30s, you've seen Latinos, African Americans having an impact on the outcome of the election perhaps they've never had before. Are you feeling inspired by that? Perhaps you disagree with that analysis. If you get in touch on facebook.com/World Have Your Say, leave your number as well, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Well, let me introduce you to the three guests we'll start this half hour with. Megan Lamala Ortiz is a freelance writer in Los Angeles. Kelly Goff's a political correspondent for TheRoot.com. She's live from New York. And Cynthia Yockey blogs at a conservative lesbian.com, and she's live from Maryland. And Cynthia, I'm glad for the chance to speak to you. We had a couple of problems with the line 10 minutes ago. Do you think that we have seen women voters and women more generally take a more significant role in US politics to the one they've had before?
Yes, I do. And I have 4 points that really relate to that. I think that the divide in our country has to do with the differing axioms that we have on how wealth is created. And Republicans and independents largely believe that wealth is created through ideas, whereas Democrats who are seeking social justice believe that wealth comes from a black box. They have no idea how it's created, but government, the people who have it have gotten it through unfair means, and government has to redistribute it for them to create social justice. So I think it's those two axioms that are at the basis of our national discussion, and that the growing group of independents actually are political homeless people. They are the fiscal conservative social liberals have been chased out of the Republican Party by social conservatives, and because they don't agree with socialism, they really can't go on to the Democratic Party. And the way forward for Republicans.
But Cynthia, you're giving me an analysis of the whole political situation, which of course is welcome. But I did ask you particularly about women, because one of the criticisms of Mitt Romney is that he didn't offer a range of policies that were attractive to women. Some people who would naturally vote Republican couldn't vote for some of the things he stood for. Do you think that's fair criticism?
No, I think that financially he had a program that was going to create enormous prosperity very quickly for not just America and all Americans, but also radiating out into the world. And what I was heading for was that what was the poison pill in his campaign was the social conservative attitudes towards pro-life, that these have to be instituted through the coercive powers of government, and women were just not going to have it because the next president is going to replace probably 3 Supreme Court justices, and on that alone, they were going to continue to vote for their right to choose.
Right. Well, we'll see if those matters for the Supreme Court come to pass. Certainly, there's a lot of speculation about where President Obama's priorities are going to lie in the next 4 years. Kelly, just before you come in, I want to bring all of you in, really, but Ashraf is watching in Punjab. He says on Facebook, we hope Obama will live up to his promise of withdrawing forces from Afghanistan. Well, he repeated it time and time again, didn't he? He said, we're going to do some nation building at home. We're bringing the troops home. 2014 is when that is scheduled to happen. And Shukri is tweeting us from Kenya as he watches. He says, back in my hometown, Kogelo, a mock election was held in honour of Obama's victory. As a country, we are all proud. And not that you need me to tell you, but President Obama's father was from Kenya, so the connection with that country is particularly strong. Let's pull up one comment here from the columnist Amy Davidson, who blogs on the New Yorker's website. She writes, Ann Romney and her husband were correct when they said, by way of dismissing the issue of reproductive rights, the women had other things to worry about, including the issues of jobs and taxes. Romney just wasn't able to persuade women that his economic plans at this fiscal cliff moment were the right ones for them as wage earners. So that fits in to some extent with what Cynthia was saying. Is that you coming in, Kelly?
Yes, it is me. And I was going to say that something that I'm very surprised has seemed to have been completely overlooked, at least from the discussion I've heard so far in the debate about the war on women and the debate on why it is that Romney actually lost women voters. It wasn't just the reproductive rights issue. It was, and that's not the only thing that people were thinking of when they heard the terms war on women. I actually think what hurt him possibly just as much, if not more so, is that he refused to give an answer on his position on the Lilly Ledbetter Act on equal pay. Because whether you're Republican, a Democrat, conservative, liberal, if you are a woman, you want to earn equal pay for equal work. And the fact that his response when he was asked about, do you support this act that makes it easier for women to sue if they are not being paid fairly to their male counterparts, his campaign's response was, I'll get back to you. They never did. And then he got asked about it in a presidential debate. He couldn't give an answer. And I think that really haunted him, because I think there probably were conservative women who might have been okay on the reproductive rights issue, because that's a religious issue and perhaps they just disagree with Democrats on that. But they're not okay with the idea of a male candidate being asked directly, where do you stand on equal pay, and saying, I'll get back to you.
All right.
I think that's what actually helped hurt him.
In terms of equal pay, where Romney stood was appointing more women and paying women more than Barack Obama ever has since he's been in the Senate.
But that's not policy. That's a campaign. That's not policy. And he never gave a position on his policy, Cynthia. If you're saying he gave a position on the issue, he never gave a position.
Kelly, give Cynthia a chance to respond to the points you're making.
But what she said just wasn't true, though.
He hires fewer of them. That's how he feels about equal pay and opportunity for women.
Can I just say for the record, she didn't respond at all to what I said. I said, when asked about his policy in government, Mitt Romney refused to give an answer, and that's factually true. So her response is fascinating, but it has nothing to do with his policy on the Lilly Ledbetter Act. That's just the point that I was making. And that haunted him. That showed up in polls that cost him.
No, the Republican position on the Ledbetter Act is that it affects a very small number of women. It affects a very small number of women.
But Mitt Romney never said this.
Well,
Cynthia, Mitt Romney never said that.
I'm not going to be like the host of the second presidential debate and start fact-checking live on air. That is a risky game. And the details of what you're debating, I don't know right or wrong. I expect there are Americans who can send us in and clear up exactly which one of you two are getting it exactly right. Now, let me read this message from Catherine in the US, who says, the news is full of information that Republicans are needing a rethink, a rebrand, a soul-searching. It's annoying. It's as if they're selling cornflakes and suddenly realise they want to sell brand. Well, I guess that's one way of putting it, Catherine, but to some extent, political operators do need to think in terms of what they're offering the people who are buying their wares, as in voting for them. Let's pull up this from Josh Gernstein, who's writing on the hugely popular Politico website. Let's see what he has to say. You can see that there. Look out, world. President Barack Obama is finally free, and he's coming your way. After 4 years of trying to fashion foreign policy with one eye on his re-election and another on the struggling US economy, Obama is now liberated on all fronts. And they always say that, don't they, of US presidents who get a second term. They can shake it off. They can do much more whatever they like. Now, let me ask all three of you who are taking part at the moment. President Obama is going to be going to Burma. Just quickly from the three of you, do you think that's an appropriate place to be part of his first overseas trip after winning this election? Perhaps, Kelly, you could go first.
I'm not sure that I have a really, really strong opinion on this one. I think that the fact that he's one of the first presidents to do it shows that he's starting his second term off with a bold and, that he's willing to take bold stances in his second term. I will say this, though, that one of the reasons I do find it somewhat interesting is I think that there has not been a lot of credit given to how much of a difference I think we will look back on and believe that the third foreign policy debate actually did make. I found that I and other pundits found that Governor Romney looked much more out of his element than any of us anticipated. And I do think that actually ended up having more of an impact with some independent voters than we've kind of given attention to in this country, in part because this is embarrassing to admit, but there were a number of sports championships on that night. And so not as many people watched the third debate. And so it just didn't get covered as heavily. But I do think that the foreign policy ended up playing more. It's very embarrassing to admit that in this country, but that's the truth.
It's funny, you're saying this, you're saying this, and it's ringing a bell because I was sitting in a bar. We did a World Have Your Say from a machining factory on the outskirts of Chicago on the day of the third debate. And we went to a bar afterwards. And we were in downtown Chicago, and we thought everyone's going to be watching the debate. Everyone was watching the Bears game. Anyway, Megan in Los Angeles.
There was also baseball too.
It's a tough choice, politics or sport. And in bars, I know which way people tend to go. Megan, you're in Los Angeles. Do you think that the president is right to be making this trip to Thailand, Cambodia, but perhaps most significantly to Burma?
I think it's really interesting because if we look demographically, we haven't talked a lot here and in general about the Asian vote and Asian American vote. So I think it's actually quite significant and interesting. And also just looking at what's been happening in Burma, I think it's interesting. But I think when we talk about foreign policy and when we praise Obama, I think one of the things that we do neglect to talk about is the fact that, for example, we've seen more unarmed drone attacks. In fact, one that just happened post-election. So I think, again, we can't assume that visitations to countries actually mean a change in policy, especially when it comes to U.S. aggression globally.
All right, thank you very much indeed. More contributions coming in from Qatar, Switzerland, Uganda, Chad, Canada and Equatorial Guinea. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, bearing in mind the level of attention on US politics, but you are keeping us on our toes. Thank you very much indeed for all of your contributions. Margaret in Honduras says on Facebook, I live in a poor third world country, Honduras, and my country offers birth control for free. Unwanted children, especially born to teenage mothers, are a healthcare issue. Well, after the news, we're going to be live in Los Angeles speaking to a second guest, the actress Maggie Contreras. But first of all, let's take a couple of minutes break here on the BBC. Hi, this is Ros Atkins with you on World Have Your Say. There was only ever going to be one subject we were talking about this Friday. Let's bring in Ben James with the World Have Your Say team to hear what you've been saying on the phones.
Well, a number of people, Ros, calling in about the way in which the candidates were speaking to the electorate during the election. Miasha in Bangladesh called to say the conversation from the Republicans is very narrow. They talk to only mainly white men. Annette, who's an American in Kenya and watching us, says similar. Obama's having a full and proper conversation with me as a woman. The Republicans just are not doing that. Joanna in Spain has a slightly different take, though, and says Obama has opportunistic policies only about social matters. And finally, Elroy just gave us a call from Greece, wants to talk about the system itself. The problem with the US, he says, is that they need more political parties instead of just the same old Republican and Democrats.
Interesting. I've just seen a couple of emails about that same subject saying the two parties don't cover all of the different opinions in America. And Ben, you're going to be on World Have Your Say's radio edition in an hour or two.
Yep, certainly am. We're going to be talking about two other big topics of conversation occupying you online today. One is that of India and foreign aid. Does India deserve foreign aid indeed? The UK government's decided to phase out cash aid to India by 2015. I wonder if you think that's the right decision. We'll also be talking about the new Archbishop of Canterbury, the new leader of 80 million Anglicans around the world. What do you hope he does with his new job? That's 1800 GMT.
Thanks, Ben. Good to speak to you. And if you haven't got it on your phone, get the BBC iPlayer radio app. It's just been released. Not you, Ben. I'm talking to everyone else. I know you've got it already. And you can listen to the BBC World Service all day long. It's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. Let's bring in Alyssa again. She lives in Virginia, but she's live from our Washington, D.C. studio. And Alyssa, I've got a message here for you from Tuffy, who's watching in America. He says, I feel insulted by Republicans who say that as a Democratic woman, I voted for Obama because of freebies or goodies. I'm a hardworking woman who voted for him because of economic issues.
I'm sure she is, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of Americans and a lot of American women and a lot of American women who are in the minority. But there's an overwhelming amount of people who are on welfare right now, and I'm sure voted for the president because they'd like to remain there. Mm-hmm. The number of people on welfare right now is out of control. I mean, where's their, working? Why would you want to work when you can just collect a paycheck from the president?
But I guess at the moment, Americans are happier with what President Obama is offering on the front of welfare than what Mitt Romney was offering. Let's bring in another guest to speak with Alyssa and Cynthia in Maryland. Maggie Contreras is an actor and writer in Los Angeles. She joined us for our radio program there a couple of weeks ago. Hi, Maggie. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. I think lots of our viewers are wondering. We've had a black president win in 2008. He's been re-elected in 2012. In 2016, will we see a woman president?
I think it's really possible. I don't know if your guests have brought up New Hampshire yet, but women have swept that state in the Congress and as governor. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. And the amount of women voters who have stepped up to the plate this year, I think they've really shown their voice, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Cynthia?
Who that candidate would be, I couldn't tell you.
Well, they're already speculating that Hillary Clinton has that nomination sewn up if she wants it. Cynthia, do you think American society is ready for a woman as a leader?
Oh, I absolutely do, but it's not going to be Hillary Clinton. She is never going to live down her behavior in the Benghazi massacre.
All right, well, we'll have to see about that. That's a particular preoccupation with a sector of the right in American politics at the moment. Alyssa, what about you? Do you think American society, well, it's not really about Hillary Clinton, but do you think, there was always speculated, would America accept a black president? It has. Would it accept a woman as its leader?
Absolutely, and I think the country has been ready for this for a while, and I think that Hillary Clinton and the progress that she made in 2008 really shows that America is ready. And regardless of if it's Hillary Clinton or not, I think that the strides of women in Congress, women in governorships, and women who make it so far to the primaries of running for president show that women are ready and we want to see someone there.
So if they're ready to take office, Maggie, one last question for you, and I did ask this earlier, but I'd be interested to hear your view. Are you sick and tired of hearing women being talked about as one voter bloc? You are, after all, 50% of the voters. Do you think America needs to be a bit more sophisticated in how it views women and their political interests?
Absolutely. Well, I don't really like boxes to begin with. I don't like when it's like, well, these people vote this way, these people vote this way only. I mean, I'm an interesting case myself. I am definitely a Democratic voter. I've always voted Democratic, but I'm also a Catholic, and I'm pro-choice, but I'm pro-life, but I'm also pro-life in all the ways that the Republicans aren't and the Democrats are when it comes to not funding our military as much, so stopping killing in other countries, death penalty.
Well, when you're talking about the military, President Obama has already said he's going to bring in defense cuts. We'll find out the full extent of those over the next year or two, I expect. Maggie, very good to have you back on World Have Your Say. Thanks also to Cynthia in Maryland, Alyssa in Washington, D.C., and all of our other guests. Remember, you can always carry on the discussion on facebook.com/World Have Your Say and get us on Twitter at BBC_WHYS. I'll see you next week at the same time. Goodbye.